Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We are joined tonight by 7 of our board members, our superintendent of schools, Dr. Timothy Harney, our assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction, Dr. Ted Fulton, our assistant superintendent for finance and operations, Mr. Rich Snyder, our district legal counsel, Mr. Christopher Clayton, our student rep, Mr. Robert Honey, and back by popular demand, we have our district clerk, Chris Oliva, who is going to be helping us out until we find a replacement. Just a few announcements. There are 2 opportunities for the community to participate during the Board of Ed meeting. The first is just before the board takes up its agenda, and the second follows the disposition of all agenda items. If you'd like to speak, you must be a resident of the school district. Any other person must be authorized by the board by a majority vote. The normal allotted time is 3 minutes. And for the convenience of the community, you can please see this. You can see the meeting on the website tomorrow. And if you'd like to follow Dr. Harney, you can follow Dr. Harney on Twitter at BBP Soup. And if you'd like to follow district, you can follow district on Twitter at BBP Schools. At this time, we open it up to the community for any new or old business that they may have. Not hearing any, we'll turn it over to Dr. Harney for a superintendent report. Dr. Harney, how are you tonight?
Good, thank you. Mr. Miller, I have a number of items I'd like to go through, so if it'd be all right, I think I'd like to let Mr. Honey go first, and then I'll follow him, just so that we can have some conversation.
Absolutely. Okay. Mr. Honey, how are you tonight?
Good, how are you? Thank you, Mr. Miller. So the first market period came to a close last Friday. I feel like it was definitely a different learning experience than we've been used to, but I feel like it's been equally rewarding and educational. Over the past month, students at the elementary levels have been learning about fire safety in honor of Fire Safety Month by taking field trips to nearby firehouses in our district. Students across the district enjoyed dressing in costume for Halloween. So students enrolled in certain science classes, such as AP Environmental Science, have been able to partake in virtual field trips that have included things such as trout dissections and biodiversity studies of samples from nearby ponds, which has been pretty cool. The Interact Club is running their annual Thanksgiving food drive virtually this year, and they've set a goal of reaching 1,000 donated items. Last week, 71 students in the 8th grade were inducted into the National Junior Honor Society, and clubs and extracurriculars are continuing to meet up on a regular basis. And then the last thing is seniors are working on finishing up college applications and other post-high school plans. And last week, 6 BBP students signed national letters of intent to continue their academic and athletic careers at Division I and II collegiate levels. So congratulations to them. And that's pretty much all I have tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Honey. Any questions from trustees? Not hearing any. Thank you so much, sir. At this time, we'll turn it back over to Dr. Harney.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. Okay, so since the last time we met, we've made some changes within our instructional model, and we have our 6th grade back now, which has been very successful. As I mentioned the last time, they're in larger class settings right now. So I'd like to thank all of our 6th grade teachers, as well as Mr. Andruskowitz, and the whole entire building staff, because it's been a very smooth transition, so I'd like to thank them. Also from grades 7 through 12, I guess we're in about week 3 now of live streaming, live instruction. As we're continuing to grow, I'd like to thank our teachers for all that they've been doing in this. This has really been a huge undertaking, and they're doing a tremendous job with that, so I'd like to thank them with that. It's not easy teaching with people in front of you and then also on a screen, so I'd really like to commend them for everything that they're doing, so thank you to them. But overall, it's been very successful so far, so thank you to them. Really, the next couple of items is, I'm going to stop after a couple because I'd like to have a couple of conversations. The first one's an easy one, though. Really, I would just like to remind all of our parents and community members that if somebody within their family does test positive for the COVID virus, that they notify us as soon as possible. The sooner we know, the quicker that we are able to act and make the decisions that we need to make. So if parents and community members, and so far it's been great, it's just kind of a friendly reminder out there to kind of help us with that, because this truly is a partnership with us, so if they can do that, that would be huge. You know, over the course of the first 2.5 months, and it's amazing that, I guess Thanksgiving is next week, we've had 8 or 9 cases now where we've had students test positive or an adult test positive within a building. We've had to close 3 buildings for 1 day. Every other buildings we've been able to stay open because really the timing of this. So I think, again, it's been a tremendous effort from many, many people. So hopefully we can continue down this road and even limit those positive cases even more. So that's some good news. The reason I wanted to bring that up is recently, as the middle of last week, I received a letter from the Suffolk County Department of Health, which has been posted to our website. And it really talks about how they've looked at over 900 cases across the districts in Suffolk County over the last few months. And really what they've noticed is they are not seeing, as of right now, I'll keep it as this as you put everything in, as everything changes on a regular basis, where you're seeing a spread within schools, which basically is a complement to what all the schools across Long Island, specifically, and I'll commend Bayport Blue Point, we put a ton of time into planning, and we are not seeing the spread within schools. We're getting isolated cases, whether they come from home or something like that, or within a community event, or some type of event outside of school. So that's something that Suffolk County has talked about. Suffolk County has also talked about in that same letter, the resources they have are obviously getting stretched because, as everyone knows, the number of positive cases is on the upswing from a New York State perspective. So one of the things they are looking at is for us to get more involved in some of the quarantining, which they'll continue to support, and ultimately they, again, will still make the final decision. But they're really asking us to take a look at the close contact versus the proximate contact. So that is something that we are starting to do. They want to be able to spend more of their time or resources on those large social gatherings or community events that are happening outside of the school districts to work on the contact tracing. So that's a letter that they had shared with us about a week ago that I have now put out information to our staff about. And I'll open that one up to the board if anyone has any questions about that letter. And I know I'd put it into your packet if anyone has any questions about that. It's just a little bit of a shift of responsibility from them to us a little bit more, but they're still going to be there for us to consult with on a daily basis.
Any questions from trustees?
Yeah, has the Suffolk Department of Health offered any more detailed guidance or any specific liaisons to help in the decision-making now that they're passing it to the schools, or no?
No, I mean, we still have our contacts, and the way the process works is as soon as we're notified of a case, we have to submit it to their portal, which is submitting the case. And then from there, what typically used to happen is they would assign somebody to the case who then would contact the school. And then we'd have to do our whole internal investigation, which we would submit to them, along with who we believed were close and proximate contacts. That process is actually still happening. What they've asked us, though, is to really take a look at the context of what they really consider a close contact in terms of within 6 feet, for 10 minutes, masks, and all those type of things. So that's really the piece that they've asked us to do a little bit more of now. But for example, the case that we even had today, we did reach out to Suffolk County Department of Health. They did give us assistance with us and even made a recommendation to us. So we were still able to do that, okay? So that becomes important for us. So that's that. Any other questions regarding to that letter? Okay. The other thing that has come out, and I guess I sent something out to the community about probably 10 days ago, was the travel letter. If people are familiar with, and obviously as we're getting close to the holidays, there was a recent, I guess it was an executive order from Governor Cuomo that changed the protocols, I guess it is, that would be for travel. So if somebody was to go out of the state for more than 24 hours, they are now, I guess they really have a choice now. Typically they would come back, and these are for the non-border states or the non-contiguous states, is they would be then subject to a quarantine for 14 days. The way it reads now, if somebody goes away, they would need to get a test while they're away within 72 hours of returning. Now, that doesn't work if you're only going for a weekend, which is more than 24 hours, but you're not there for 4 or 5 days, so that doesn't play. But then when you would come back, you can now, you would quarantine for 3 days and then you would get a test on that fourth day, and if that turned negative, then you'd be able to return to your kind of normal responsibilities. So that's the most recent change. So that is what I was putting out to the community about a week ago. So any questions about that travel memo that came out or the things that went out to the community, if anyone, the board or community had that? No? Okay. The biggest things that are coming up is two things. And this is the most interesting, and we're still trying to get a handle on this. The governor has talked a lot about micro clusters. He's talked a lot about the yellow, the orange, and the red zones, which continuously changes a little bit and as recent as Sunday. So how it used to read was if a district, now through my conversations with the Suffolk County Department of Health, and my most recent one was Friday, trying to get an idea of what quantifies as the zone, nobody has really been able to tell us that. So for example, I asked the question, is Suffolk County considered a zone? Or is an area around Bayport Blue Point considered a zone? Nobody could really give you a clear understanding of what your zone is, which makes it a little bit tricky. They do believe from things that have happened upstate, if you see within the Department of Health, they have a number of websites now that are tracking obviously positive cases. And there are a number of areas upstate that have been quantified as either a yellow or an orange zone. They do not seem to be full counties. So that's why I tend to believe it is not a full county. But again, we're still waiting for clarification on that. Now, what it used to be is if you were in the yellow zone, the question would be is one, you could automatically close and go to virtual, or you could try to consider to do 20% of testing, the COVID testing, which adds its own challenges as you're trying to figure that out. And it used to be you'd have to do it every single week, and if you continue to do that, then you can continue to offer live instruction, which is obviously something that we would continue to like to do. The real question becomes, how do you do the testing? As recent as Sunday, I received another letter or memo from the New York State Department of Health or Governor Cuomo's office, basically saying they're going to change it a little bit. And the reason they're changing it, or the rationale that has been shared with us, is they have not seen schools as, quote, what they've been calling these super spreader type of events, right? So they don't consider that. So what they had said on Sunday was, if your area is designated as a yellow zone, then what would happen is your school district or the school, whatever fell in, if it fell in, because it's possible one school, if the way they're describing it, could fall into a zone and not the other four, if that was the case, that the school would have 2 weeks to get 20% of their population tested. Okay, now if it was our district, it was our entire district, that would be about 500 people. We're about 2,000 students and about 500 staff, and those are round numbers, but just to give you an idea. The question really becomes then, and then what happens if you did the testing and the percentage of people who tested positive is less than what the average was for that got you into the yellow zone, which is a 7-day rolling average. Typically it's 2.5%. If your school average was less than that, then you can continue to stay open, do live instruction, do in-person instruction, and the way it seems to read is that you would not need to do any additional testing. That became to me a little bit more interesting than trying to do 20% every single week, because I don't know how to do that. When looking at the testing and trying to test 20%, and that's a whole new thing, because you have to talk about consent, confidentiality, there's a lot of other hidden pieces to it. If you're thinking about the testing, it's really, or if you ended up in the yellow zone, you really probably have 3 options that I can see. One is, say, the district would just go virtual and then not worry about any testing if that was away. That's probably a possible alternative. The second way would be to try to connect with some organization or group or medical place where they can do the testing for you, okay? Whether it be on site or off site or those type of things. That's another option. The third option is they've offered where districts can become a service laboratory. You have to apply for it though. And we would need our medical director, which would be our doctor, who would kind of oversee it. We would need to do training. And to apply for it, it's usually about a 3 or 4 week application. okay? If you do apply for it, doesn't mean you have to use it. So it's just something you can do. So over the last couple of weeks, things that we've been trying to do and people I've reached out to is I've been trying to make a connection with CityMD to see if they can help us with the testing. I also know my organization, the superintendent organization, has been working with the county executive as recent as Sunday, and we're trying to figure out if there's something that we could do even with our hospitals, if there's something there that's a possibility. Right now, all districts right now are trying to figure out how to get through this testing because the way they're writing it, if they can hit that 20% number, it may be a way to try to keep the in-person instruction going on. But there are a lot of moving parts to it, and there's a lot of things that are happening with it. So that's kind of a piece of it. And then if you enter the orange or red zone, it adds a whole different element. If you've seen it, and they're actually talking about closures within your community or things that were within that zones. So it's becoming very tricky. So I'll kind of open it up for that. So those are the kind of two. Is there any questions about the zones or testing? What we have talked about as recent of today, as I said, is I've had a number of conversations with CityMD. I have another conference call with them on Thursday. Again, I don't know because the numbers are rising so much. Personnel is a big challenge for everybody in terms of doing it. And then, as I said, I know our organization will be meeting with the Suffolk County Department of Health again as well. I also know the Suffolk County Department of Health has an RFP out for testing as well. But that doesn't come to light until, I believe, November 27th, when they're starting to get some answers for that. So there are a lot of, I'll call it, small fires out there that people are trying to figure out, but we just don't have an answer yet when it comes to that. Questions about that? Because that's probably the most confusing part, and people are hearing this on a regular basis on the news.
So has the district explored potentially becoming a testing center? So I know some of the schools upstate have been trying to take that route as well.
Yeah, some of the places upstate have done it, and they've been somewhat successful from what I understand. I don't know if they've actually gone out and done the actual testing, but they've applied for the piece. One of the things we talked about today, and I had a conversation with a number of people, was doing the application. Because again, you don't need to use it if you get accepted. So that's kind of what I'm looking at right now, is to make the application. There's a lot of other things that play into it, though, is how do you do it? How do you do the company? I don't know if we could pull off all the particulars to it, but I figured why not think about applying, and then we're not going to know for 3 or 4 weeks anyway, and then maybe we continue to look at some of these other coals in the fire, so to speak. So, other questions? Okay. The other piece that I wanted to talk about related to this is recently I've been starting to be asked about building and field use. My feeling is right now when it comes to, I'll start with building use, because we've been doing such a good job inside the buildings and really trying to limit the contact. At this point, we originally said at November 1st we would take a look again at building use. I would make the recommendation that right now that we still hold off on building use, especially for the inside of the building. That's what I would recommend at this time. Staff is stretched very thin right now. We're continuously trying to clean. Every couple of days we're getting a positive case. So we're continuously trying to put all our manpower there as well. So in terms of the insides of the building, I would recommend that we still hold off. But I'd like to open that up to the board for discussion.
Anyone have any concerns with keeping the inside of the building closed for building use forms? Good, Dr. Harney.
Okay, thank you. The second piece is field use. There are a number of districts around us that have started to allow outside organizations, community organizations, use their fields. We have held pretty steadfast on that where we have not. Although I know there are people out there using the fields, but if we see an organization right now, we are still not allowing them on the field. The more I have conversations with the Suffolk County Department of Health, they're not as worried about the outside activity. What they get more concerned about is how students are coming and going to the field, What are they doing before an activity or an after activity? Are they there hanging out and taking pictures as a group? Are they just hanging around as a group and talking? Those are the pieces where you start to see, I think, where the contact tracers come into place, and that's how I'm noticing athletes or student athletes would be quarantined. If we were to look at field use, there's a couple of things I would like to look at. I would, one, like to put some restrictions on it, where if someone was to use it, they were following all the guidelines that we currently use. That means masks completely, the social distancing, all of those. I would ask the outside organization as well to submit a safety plan, which is honestly what anyone who would let use the building had to do, so that's not something new. Even when they were doing the elections, we made them submit a safety plan to us because they are within our building, so that's not something. I would also like to have who's ever organizing the activity outside, they'd have to sign off on something to basically say, you need to follow these kind of guidelines. I've started to play around with a draft of something. If the board is open to the idea of entertaining outside use, I'd like to share it with you, and then maybe we revisit it on December 1st. That's kind of my thoughts. I'm not opposed to it, but I would like to make sure there are certain things in place if we were to do it. But as I said, I'm playing around with a document. I'd like to share it with you first. I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Tim. I know in the district I teach in, many of the cases, the positivity has gone up due to outside interactions, outside sports that aren't necessarily sanctioned by the school. And in order for this, so much of what is done inside of the school becomes moot if people are not adhering to the social distancing, the mask wearing. And I've seen locally on fields where teams are practicing, playing, nobody, coaches included, are wearing masks. And we would have to ensure, and I know that your guidelines would state it, but we would have to ensure that there would be consequences if they are not. Because all the work we'd be doing and all the hard work from administration and from teachers would be rendered useless if kids are just going out. And I know so many of them are out socializing without masks anyway, but trying to minimize that is, if it's especially on school property and something we can control, I think it would be, personally, I think it would be better to keep the fields closed, but I know how important sports and team activities are. It just seems like, especially now that there's a surge of these cases coming, this does not seem like the best time to have kids together playing sports. But that's just my opinion on that.
I would just say I would prefer if we expedited it and we did open the fields up for building use forms. The weather is going to get colder. We're not going to be using the fields for much longer, so I would ask that we trust you, Dr. Harney, whatever protocols you put in place, I'm sure are more than enough for the district. So I would ask that we expedite it, we open the fields up, and we ask people to follow the protocols you put in place. We open the fields back up. Because right now, if you drive past here on Saturday, they look open. So the fields are pretty much open now. I would just say the parks are open in town. If we can open up the parks for our school districts, I think that would be one small thing we can do while it's still semi-nice out.
I think the key would be and really listening to both of you would be ensuring that people would follow the protocols. That becomes the big piece. And if they were not, we'd have to revoke the building use form, which would be clearly stated, and that's what would have to happen, because I agree, we've done a ton of work to continue to do what we've been doing, but I also understand some of the mental welfare of our students as well in terms of them getting out in our community and doing that. We just have to be smart about it. I mean, we've been doing very well within our phys ed classes, but that's a small group, obviously, because we've been keeping it very isolated. So I wanted to bring it forward, though, because I know I've been getting some inquiries about it.
Ms. Byrne?
Right now we separate the kids into A days and B days. And with outside groups, is there a way that we can still maintain that A and B day so that if there is a team that gets sick, that we somehow aren't infecting the whole school? Like, would there be some, because why keep them separated in school if then they go onto the fields? I don't know, I guess when they're on the fields, they're masked and they're not going to get each other sick, that's the idea.
Well, it's interesting, right? And it's a good point is when students are leaving us now and they're going to go play with their club teams, they're already being intermingled right now. That is happening right now, right? So I don't know how we would control it for an outside organization, because they're probably even pulling kids from other communities as well. That's probably part of it. I think it becomes more of if we wanted to do it, and again, we don't have to be, I just wanted to bring it forward, was we'd really have to ensure that people are following whatever we put in place. That really becomes the key.
So is it already just happening, our kids are going other places anyway and doing this, so it's
Correct.
already happening, so if we open up our fields, we just make it convenient for
Yeah,
parents?
really what you're doing is, you already have club lacrosse going on, you have Titan baseball, you have club soccer going on. Those are going on which kids are already participating in. And you're having kids being drawn from different places who are coming together. It would be more about letting our community use some of our fields here. That's really what it would be about.
Yeah, Dr. Harney, I align with you on that. I think that we should, open up the field as soon as possible. Kids are out there right now, they are playing, but I think giving them some extra guidance and utilization of the mask is a big step forward. But I think it would also help to minimize some of the challenges that they're facing right now by being out there. So.
Really would be talking about weekend use, if any, right now. And again, we're getting close to the winter now because our teams are still doing the optional kind of like open field type of workout still. So, and it's, if anyone knows, it looks like it's pitch black at 4:30 p.m. these days. So what I would like to do at least, and continue this conversation the next go around, but I'd like to kind of share with you at least the guidelines I was thinking about if we were thinking about this. And by then we might get some additional information from the state as well anyway, so we can kind of go from there if people are open to that.
I would just say, can we clarify what that means though? So are you sending these protocols out?
I would be sharing them with the board in our newsletter, and then we can have an open discussion with it at our December 1st meeting.
Would we consider accepting your protocols as is and continuing to open the fields?
I think,
we trust that
personally, I would like to wait till after Thanksgiving. I'd like to get through that. That's just me personally. Through the holidays right here. Only because, like I know most weekends right now, we have people on to help us monitor it a little bit. And right now, I'm not sure I would over that break.
But I'm just saying, if we're following your protocols, we're wearing masks. Let's be honest, on the weekends, the fields are still being used, whether we say that they can use them or not. So I would just say, why don't we just open them up and ask people to follow the protocols that you're putting in place so we can use the fields.
Well, I think the issue is that the protocols aren't published yet. That's it. And Mr. Miller, I want to be clear here. I'm with you. I would prefer to open them sooner rather than later. But we do have to take the time to memorialize what criteria they have to follow and then what the repercussions are if they don't.
I hear that, but the state does have protocols in place for athletics right now. They're out there.
Well, even for example, I'm going to be honest with you, we have very few building uses in, though we have people that have started to ask for it. But to do that, they were going to need to get this written version. They'll need to read it, understand it, and sign off on it. That's why I said I don't think it's really going to happen within the next week or so anyway, because I'm not done with them yet. So I want to make sure of that. So I really want to make sure that I have the time to make sure I have them all in place, and then I do want to be able to share them with you.
Dr. Honey, what would be the soonest you think you could have that form in place?
I could have it. I can get the protocols and procedures that I'm taking in AM. I'm really actually doing what Mr. Miller said. I'm taking things that are outlined in the state, and then what also matches with what our district does. I could put that into your Friday packet, so you have that. And then really the next week is Thanksgiving, and then we're back the following Tuesday. So that's kind of that's why I was kind of looking at, so we got a kind of a quick turnaround, and that's December 1st. Then if we said we were going to start to do this starting December 1st, we're kind of,
I mean, I agree in one point, but in other aspect, that's 2 weeks, that's 2 more weekends that we won't be able to use the fields. I mean, I would assume over Thanksgiving break, that would be the best time to use the fields, when kids are not in school. So if we don't come back till December 1st, I mean, that really only gives us probably a couple weekends left in December. So I'm not trying to hinder, I'm not trying to get in the way of protocols, but I'm also trying to open fields up for everyone.
Has Section 11 provided any guidance in relation to like the low, medium, and high-risk sports?
yeah, so the latest thing it's actually interesting you say that. The latest that came out today, that was on my list, so it's a kind of a good lead into it, is they talked about for winter sports. Now, again, remember Section 11 and Section 8, I think Section 8 is Nassau, they had put everything off until January 4th, right, the 3 seasons, they pushed everything off. Some of the upstate sections were starting as of November 30th, which would have been their winter session, some of the upstate sections. Guidance came out today that no high-risk sports could start prior to January 4th. Okay, so that's what they came out with. And what they did say is basically they were delaying it, and then the moderate sports, and they listed them, and I don't remember off the top of my head, so whether it was like winter track, bowling, I forget what the other ones were, they could start up as soon as November 30th. So that's the most recent guidance from them. And I'm going to put that in your packet this weekend, too. I have that for you.
And that's
So whatever
everything you
guys
say?
want me to do, I can do. I mean, I can get it done sooner if you're good with it, and then at the end of the weekend you want to tell me you're good with it, we can do. I can do
I
anything.
mean, I
you
guess the
wanna
one
do.
question I've had for the board, do we need these protocols from Dr. Harney? Or do we trust that he will just put them in place with the best interest of the school district? Because that's what we're really waiting on. I don't know if we really need them.
I'm comfortable with moving forward if needed with what Dr. Honey's proposing.
No, I think it's a good idea that we have them, read them, review them. Maybe we want to limit something in them, like the number of people on each field or something, or maybe the details. I mean, if anything bad happens, it comes back to us. So I'd like the time to review it. I mean, we haven't seen them at all yet.
Yeah, I'm using a lot of things, so like you bring up limiting the numbers, I am limiting the numbers. And I think the number was 50 on site because that's the number that came out through the state guidance.
I would just say the parks in town are open. I mean, kids could easily just go to the park. I mean, obviously the turf isn't better to go to, but we do have fields available in town you could just go to. So, I mean, we're just asking kids to go to a different field, I guess.
We're not liable for the town fields, though.
Right, but if I fill out a building use form, then it becomes my liability too.
If you know what the guidelines are that you have to follow.
What's that?
I said, if you know what the guidelines are that you have to follow.
I mean, some of this is personal responsibility as well. I mean, come by this Saturday. There'll be people on the field. We know that.
No doubt.
That is correct, but the only difference is, I mean, like, we have not authorized them to be on the field.
But then can I at least say, will the security guards not be here on the weekends? Is that an option?
Can't say that.
You know, it's really, when someone does get COVID and you have to do that 14-day quarantine, it's a burden. So, I mean, I don't know. The fact that people are already illegally using the fields, I don't know what we do about that. But
Well, I can tell you what we typically do. If we have somebody on and it's a larger group and we don't feel it, we have people who then will ask them to leave. Because especially if it looks like it's an organized piece, because then we are putting the district in jeopardy because it becomes a liability issue. So we are currently doing that. If, mom and dad are up there with their kids and playing, or even a group of 4 or 5 kids on their own are there playing on their own, we kind of remind them of trying to do the right thing. when we have security on.
Tim, it's almost December. I mean, there's still a problem. I mean, it's going to be a lot of athletics going on in the next couple of weeks and through the winter on the fields. That we're really.
I think it just depends on the weather, to be honest with you. So I don't know. I mean, it's been a kind of a mild fall so far, so I don't really know the answer to that one.
I mean, if your guidance meets Suffolk County health guidance, I think we're good.
I honestly can go either way. I just wanted to know, because I know I always like to, so you guys see it and so you have it. I just wanted you to have it. But if you're comfortable with what I'm going to put together, I will be following the guidance, and I'm fine with that as well.
So where's everyone at? Any more discussion needed for this?
I think everybody's got different, like, personal views on how protective they should be compared to others. You hope that people that are overseeing these organizations do follow the guidance. But at the end of the day, whether you agree or disagree, there's guidance out there. Let's follow it. And if it checks the box and allows people to go and utilize the fields in a safe way, that's fine. I'm not an expert. I can't determine, what should be done and what shouldn't be done. As long as we're meeting the county health standards, we should be fine.
I think also, too, is, we're doing it on the contingency that we're going to be giving out field utilization. So, every one of those has to be scrutinized carefully.
And again, just to make it clear, if we had a mandatory shutdown, this all goes away as well, just so, right, just like we did in the spring. It just becomes part of it. Correct.
Anyone else? Do we want to put it to a vote? I would make a motion to open the fields up effective this weekend.
I can't promise you I'll have it for this weekend. I gotta finish up the
So I'll make a
document.
motion to open the
As soon as, if you give me as soon as
facilities
possible,
up
that will be fine.
when Dr. Harney completes his protocols.
Second.
Was that Billy? Mr. Hall, any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
So I'm going to count that off as Mr. Krug, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Hall, myself. Opposed? Ms. Byrne, Mr. Borowski, Mr. Siri, any abstentions? Dr. Harney, whenever your protocols are ready, we are ready to open up the fields.
Okay. It will still be in your packet this weekend too, so you'll have everything. All right? And then, and if there's anything you see that missed, just send them my way, and I'll take care of that as well. All right. The next item that I have is there have been a number of, discussions, articles, rumors out there about different districts doing things between the breaks in terms of closing their school proactively. And each school has their own rationale, so I'm not going to go into that what schools decide to do. I'm really thinking about Bayport Blue Point. Really where I sit on this, and I know people have asked me, is I would really like to keep the schools open as much as possible. I think we have some tremendous protocols and procedures in place. We put a lot of time and effort to it. Just even the things that we've seen from our cases, if I could knock on wood right now, I would, is you're not seeing where you had a situation in the class and then more in the class and then more in the class. So things that we've been doing have been effective. So really what I would like to, I don't know if it's really a recommendation, but what I'd like to support is really, I would like to have the kids here as long as we can, because at some point we may be asked to close or mandated to close. So I'd rather not do that prior to that. I think it's important that we keep the kids here. But I just kind of wanted to share with that because I know that's been out and about within different towns and communities and school districts. And again, every school district has a very different situation, but that's kind of where I am right now.
Anybody have any issues, concerns with that? Thank you, Dr. Harney.
All right, really the last couple of things, I did sports already, was just as a reminder now, the holidays are coming up, and I'm trying to put something together to send out to the community. Is obviously Governor Cuomo has put out his own piece in terms of social gatherings. I would ask that people really be cognizant of what they're doing over the holidays. We saw a definite spike after, one, the election, and two, after Halloween. Those were two events that seemed to cause spikes not only within our own community, but New York State as a whole. So I would continue to ask people to kind of be vigilant and following the small gatherings, social distancing, wearing a mask, because the one thing I can definitely be certain of is if we're able to continue to do that within our community, we'll be able to keep our students in school. And that's our ultimate goal here, where we can keep our students in school, especially with the amount of work we've done. So it's really kind of just a friendly reminder, a request, an ask from myself, and I know our staff, just so that we can continue to try to keep the students in school. So that's really that. And then really the last two things is, it's really just some good news, is we held our trunk or treat here at the high school on Halloween. I got to give a credit and a big thank you to Mrs. Eberhardt and Mr. Haas, and I know there were other staff that helped out as well, but it was a great day. They did follow all the social distancing and all the protocols, and they raised over $1,200, which is great when you're thinking about it. I believe it was $5 a student, so think about the numbers right there. So we had a large number of students that came through, so thank you to you guys for everything. And then I was lucky the other night, got invited to the National Junior Honor Society, which always is a pleasure. So we had to do it virtual. It was still great seeing kids all dressed up at home, sitting with mom and dad. It actually had a little, it was different, but it was very nice. So I'd like to thank Mr. Andruskowitz, Mr. Peschker, and Mrs. Armstrong, who were the co-advisors there. So thank you for giving us, our students, something that they could really look forward to. So thanks for that. I know I said I had a lot for today, but it's been 3 or 4 weeks since I've seen everybody. So thank you, and if you have any questions, just ask.
Thank you, Dr. Harney. At this time, we'll open it up for our first presentation of the night. We have an audit report by Mr. Pete Rodriguez. How are you tonight, sir?
Good evening, everybody. So again, my name is Pete Rodriguez with the auditors for the school district. We audit the financial statements. Okay, so the document that we produce is about 60 pages long. Everything in that document belongs to the school district. We do issue 2 reports within that document. One is our professional standards require us to issue an opinion on the financial statements. This opinion will tell the readers how much they can rely on the numbers. Okay, so we issue an opinion, and we also issue a report on the government auditing standards regarding your internal controls, all the financial reporting, as well as compliance with laws and regulations. Okay, so what we do is to get enough information to render an opinion, we have to look at the backup to your numbers. Okay, so we start with, say, cash, and we go out to the bank, and the treasurer will log into the bank accounts. We can then look at see what you actually have in the bank. That's third-party, corroboration. That's the strongest audit evidence we have. So we can see what the bank says you have. We can compare it to your books and compare it to your bank recs. So we do that. On the revenue side, we're looking at property taxes. We can tie the property taxes into, your resolution setting your tax levy and your tax cap calculations. So we do that. So that's obviously your largest revenue. State aid, we can go onto their websites and we confirm everything that was paid to the school district, both as far as general aid in the general fund and your federal and state grants, and also school lunch grants. So that's the kind of stuff we have to do. We have to look at a lot of analytic review, comparing numbers from the current year to the prior year, seeing where there may be some anomalies or the variances that we have to investigate. We look at payroll, biggest expense that you have, and we compare it to everything's on sampling. We pull a sample of teachers, civil service, the different bargaining groups, compare to make sure they're being paid properly in accordance with the contracts. Look at a lot of purchase orders, making sure that the purchase orders are approved, that they're supported with invoices and canceled checks. All this stuff leads us to being able to render our opinion. We use our professional judgment. When we have enough information, we can issue an opinion. So we did issue an opinion on the Bayport Blue Point School District. It's what's known as an unmodified opinion. It's a clean opinion. Okay, it states when you read that opinion, it'll state that these statements are prepared in accordance with generally accepted accounting principle, they're fairly presented, and they're free of material misstatements. So now the readers can rely on those numbers, and then they can do their own evaluation of your financial condition. So you have a clean opinion on the financial statements. I mentioned the report on the government auditing standards on internal controls and compliance. You know, part of our audit is to look at your internal controls. We don't look at it to express an opinion on your controls. We look at it to see if there's areas that we want to, test more than other areas. But in that review of internal controls, if we come across a material weakness, we have to state it in that government report. We did not find any instance of material weakness in your internal control structure, nor any instance of non-compliance with laws, regulations, and grants. So the reporting is all very clean. We did issue a report on the extra classroom activity accounts, which is a cash basis. Cash receipts, cash disbursements, very simple. There was much less activity this year because of the COVID-19 and the school closing. And we did issue a management letter. We followed up on about 4 or 5 management comments from last year, of which most were corrected or improved. So the district has been working diligently to correct any recommendations that we make. And this year we just had two minor comments, one on your fund balance and one on compensated absence liabilities. Questions?
Yeah, if you could just dig in a little deeper to the recommendations.
The current year recommendations?
Yeah.
Okay, one has
You
to
said
do
the
with
fund balance?
you had to do your unassigned fund balance. Okay, the district has decided to exceed the real property tax cap, real property tax law section 1318, which allows you to keep 4% in your fund balance. This year was like 6.5. And you really, that decision, I think, was done because of the COVID-19, and we don't know what's going to happen over the next school year and how much of that money you might need for different situations. So you're over the 4% on that, and the compensated absence liability just has to do with, that's a Gatsby 34 long-term sick day bank. And the original calculation that came to us, it was incorrect. It was missing a bargaining unit, and there was just some mistakes in the calculations. So we kicked it back to the district to fix it. What we're recommending is that before it comes to us, somebody prepares it and somebody reviews it, separately, does a separate review on the calculations. How was that?
Any other questions?
You say uncompensated absences?
I'm sorry?
What, you said compensated absences or?
Yeah, it's a sick day bank.
Any other questions from trustees?
So I just want to clarify, so basically because the surplus that we had because of, various expenditures that, when we shut down, like busing and stuff like that, that we saved on or BOCES, we're putting that in the unassigned fund balance for next year to hedge risk, whereas the comptroller guidance is usually 4% of your budget.
New York State real property tax law, correct.
Yeah.
4% of next year's budget.
So we're pushing those limits to 6.6 for potential risk of revenues that we may or may not get this year, and additional expenses.
Correct.
Is that? I
You
just want
could
to
have-
clarify that.
It's basically so that we can get to the money for the money that we spent on COVID expenditures this year.
And also, you're looking at potentially some revenue shortfalls, some state aid potential cuts.
Yeah.
So, locking it up in a reserve at this point in time really doesn't make any sense. And a lot of the districts that we do in the firm have gone over the 4% for the first
So
time.
normally going 6.6% would probably be not so good, but I guess because of the unknowns of the future and the situation that we're in, it's somewhat justifiable.
Like I said, I have in the firm, I have 8 or 9 clients that have gone over for the first time because of the situation that's out there.
Yeah.
Because once it's in the reserve, it's going to be used for that particular expense. And you might not have that expense, the employee benefit reserve is for retirees. What if you get no retirees, you can't use the money? So I think it was prudent to keep it that way. I've had districts that have been over the 4% for the last 25 years, and nothing ever happens. I think that you'll correct it for next year, based on the situation. I hope that I'm not here next year in November talking about COVID-19 still, but we'll see how that plays out.
If we were to continue to stay over the 4%, would you recommend against that?
we would make a recommendation that you come up with a plan, and being the management of each year, sure.
What is, you said some districts have been doing it for 25 years. There's never been any issues or concerns from anyone?
I only know of one situation where there was a concern, and it had to do with somebody from the resident, from the public in that community petitioning the Commissioner of Education to do something about it. So he came down and gave the board, an ultimatum.
They don't want districts, the board want.
Okay. Any other questions? Mr. Rodriguez, thank you so much for your time. We truly appreciate it.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a good night.
You have a good holiday. At this time, we will turn it over to Mr. Snyder for a fiscal position presentation and fund balance.
Yeah, just for everyone to kind of put this in context, the idea of this presentation will kind of show you how we ended up with the extra surplus, and then really kind of confirming what we're doing as per what Mr. Rodriguez said. So we'll kind of move through this for you rather quickly, but you have it.
Okay, good evening. I'll take you through the fiscal impact of COVID-19 on the actual operations of 1920, and then look at what we know is the impact so far for 2021, and then talk about that fund balance issue that you just heard about. Thank you. Okay, so again, we'll go through those three items. So looking directly at 1920 actual results contained in the audit report, this is again what happened. A common metric that we've talked about right here in public is how do you measure how strong a district's finances are, and the number one metric to do that is take your fund balance and all of your reserve accounts and divide that by your budget, and that's what the controller uses. Wall Street looks at that number, and you see our history of that percentage going back to 15-16 all the way through 1920, and we spoke probably it was a year or two ago that the average for Long Island was just over 21%. So you can see we've grown dramatically. We've gotten stronger financially since really what was a low back in 15-16. We're at 18.4%. That 18.4% translates into dollars in the upper right corner of the screen to $1.8 million. That is the surplus we had for 1920. And just as an FYI, you see the history there, and you could see that going back to 12-13 when the district was still, and all districts were wrestling with the GEA, you were in the red by millions of dollars every year. So let's talk about that $1.8 million surplus for 1920 and how COVID impacted it. We start with that number, and then I sort of use this slide to dissect the number itself. And I come down and say, through BOCE, special education tuition savings, that really happened during that 3.5 month shutdown. We add to it the transportation savings that Trustee Johnson just mentioned, some other special ed issues, some credits from BOCES, even looking at the dental expenses because staff members could not go to the dentist during that time period. Those all contributed to the $1.8 million surplus. Taking away from it in a smaller manner were the loss of the dance studio revenue, which happened in the spring, which couldn't take place. We had and still do have unemployment insurance going over budget because of the COVID benefits that were established by the state and the feds. Interest rates collapsed, so we're experiencing losses there. And COVID facilities maintenance is really all the testing and cleaning that we had to do during that 3-month period. Those numbers combined together account for $621,000 of the $1.8 million surplus. What you see below it is the life insurance proceeds, which we've talked about here also with the split dollar retiree collection that really the board kind of spearheaded with the administration. That's a one-time shot, so I kind of back it out here for the sake of analysis. And I look at it as a $650,000 surplus with the extraordinary COVID stuff removed, and that's an accounting principle to say you really should isolate extraordinary items. And then the one shot I just think is good for the analysis to say we're never going to experience a one shot like that again. So you're left with 650,000. This slide is more of an FYI to further dissect that 650,000, showing you some other items that helped and hurt the surplus. I think the most interesting one was the health insurance. For the first time in my career, and going back a couple of probably decades, you had a decrease in health insurance premiums. So now looking at what it looks like for 2021, these are the figures consolidated that we actually know are increasing costs for 2021. There's quite a bit of staffing there, whether it's custodial, teachers, speech, more nursing. You have some materials and supplies in the nursing area, which include all the PPE. In buildings and grounds, you have all the shields and barriers that you see throughout the buildings, storage containers, air filtration, revamping the water fountains, wipes, cleaning supplies, even disinfectant backpacks that the custodians use to clean the rooms, air conditioning, even supplies for transportation. And then in the technology area, which certainly evolves quite a bit, you're looking at more microphones and webcams. We have an allocation for additional devices that is a projection, as well as a larger number there for $195,000 should we need to go to a full virtual mode. So what we have there is $1.4 million in expenditures isolated for the year. If you keep in mind that we adopted the budget with a deficit of $206,000 in it, you're looking at $1,615,000 of a projected deficit today in November for 2021. And still looming is, state aid problems. There's some talk about it being remedied because of, the election and things changing in Washington, D.C., but when the money hits the account is when we should count on that. For now, we still have threats of state aid reductions, and they are, in fact, still holding our state aid. So going back to that chart, if you take the $1.6 million deficit and you plot it, you see we have a nice, well, not so nice shift going from a $1.8 million audited surplus for 1920. And I think the motto for the presentation is you give it right back based on what we're seeing today in 2021, because one tends to wipe out the other. So that brings us into, we have this $1.6 million that we're projecting that we will need to support the 2021 budget. How do we pay for it? And that's what ties back to what Mr. Rodriguez said, that we are recommending, and this is not unique to us, there are many districts doing it, that we take that 1920 surplus, place it in the fund balance account, because that gives us the flexibility we need to pay for all those COVID items. By putting it in the reserves, you run the risk of running into legal and accounting regulations that could prevent us from using it, and that's the basis of saying we leave it in fund balance. And in doing so, you help protect not only your reserve balances, but you help protect the 4% balance itself. And honestly, that is our number one responsibility from a fiscal standpoint, in my opinion, is to protect that 4% account. This is a quick little snapshot I put together to show you the reconciliation of the 4% fund balance account. You started at $2.9 million. You add that surplus right in there. There's some required additions and reductions related to encumbrances and interest allocations. And what you wind up is an additional $1.9 million in available funds to deal with COVID and still maintain your 4% balance. So the 1.9 sits on top of that. And what we already know is we have 1.6 million identified. So you got, in my head, another 300,000 to help deal with additional COVID expenses before we have to look somewhere else. And it's the somewhere else that we'll have to see what happens, but we certainly don't want it coming out of the fund balance account. So as we were saying in public with Mr. Rodriguez, this is temporary. There's certainly no intention of going past June 30th. With this money sitting here, we can, at will, here in public with a resolution, transfer the money at any point that we deem we want. That's how simple it is to get that 1.9 million out of there. As the bills come in, we'll pay them, and by June 30th, I think the administration is committing to you that the 4% account will be returned to where it is. Obviously, if COVID continues and something happens, with the pandemic spreading or vaccines and all that stuff doesn't pan out the way I think we're all hoping it will, it could change that plan, but for now, there's no intention of going past June 30th of 21 with that money there. This is a snapshot I put together using audited data. That's 2012 fund balance and reserves compared to 2020 fund balance and reserves. So you can see at our peak fiscal strength, which was 2012, we were at 20.38%. We spoke about that number in the past being slightly below average, but close enough to say that our fiscal strength was average. We're coming back at 18.4. We're happy with those results. But with that deficit, if we assume it's realized for 2021, and again, it's a projection, and it's November, and it's early, but if it did happen, this slide shows you that we go back down to 16.26, and what that essentially means is you took your 1920 surplus and you used it to pay for your 2021 deficit, and we're right back to where we started from. Some summary statements about the importance of, again, protecting that 4% account, and again, the understanding is we will go back to that same balance as of June 30th, and that we clearly are not alone in what we're doing. Clearly not alone. Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. If you could just clarify, we would be at 6.6 in unassigned fund balance, which is from the 4% to the 6.6%, that's 1.9 million?
Correct, sir.
So do you know what the 4% is off the top of your head?
It's back on that slide. Whoops. Are you doing that, Kev?
2.9.
Chris?
No.
Yeah, I forget that. I just want to be specific because we have it. This isn't working anymore.
2.937?
It'd be 3 million.
3 million.
That's the 4%.
So theoretically, an unassigned fund balance is 4.9 million?
Actually, technically, it'd be, with the 300,000, it would be higher, because if your expenses come in at 1.6, and what's left over, the 1.9, you technically would have $300,000, whether to increase the 4.0 or to put it somewhere else.
Well, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but that number of the 3,024,000 is what 4% would look like for us.
Sure, but you got 1.9 million.
That's the excess, the 4.9 less
With the
than 3.
potential of expenses exceeding 1.6, which means you're still going to have $300,000 in surplus that either goes into that 4%, or it goes to another reserve account, or we do something else with the money.
Mr. Johnson, I think one of the things that Mr. Snyder was projecting for that 300,000 was the potential withholding of state aid. That plays into that, correct?
I'm saying,
Mr.
yeah,
Snyder?
again, remember, it's November, and it's very early to be doing this, but we don't have really any choice but to say this is where we are today. But with withholding of state aid, the pandemic is increasing and not really knowing, and the superintendent and I have learned that it's very difficult to project what's going to happen with these things. I think we're in a good position financially to deal with what we already know, but that other 300,000 is sort of elusive. If we need to spend it, then we can spend it on COVID, but if we don't, you're correct, sir. It can easily be transferred on any resolution between now and June of 21 back into the other reserves.
So I got a few questions. So on the data presented, so when we look at these numbers and we look at the potential for a $1.6 million shortfall, is that a worst case scenario? Does that include the budgets that we looked at early in the year with the 10% holdback of aid? Does that include all that, or is this like a normalized number?
It's a normal, it does not include it.
The 1.4 of the 1.6 is money we've spent to get ourselves open this year. Additional staff, and it's a lot of staff and a lot of PPE. The other 200, if you remember when we did the budget in May, we knew that we were going in this, but we were very confident with what was in when we thought was a shortfall. So that's why Mr. Snyder's putting the 1.4 and the 200 plus, and that's where the 1.6 comes from.
And so that deficit's based on if New York State fully gives us the money that they were going to give us if there was no pandemic.
Correct.
So if they cut to 10%, which we're still trying to tell or even our staff, not to use that 10% that we had identified at that time. So that's still sitting in there. But remember, that was supposed to be used for other things. We also don't know, these are all the unknowns, right? We don't know where we are. We were talking about sports earlier. We don't know what's going to happen with sports going forward. Will that have an impact from a COVID standpoint?
So the 1.6, Dr. Harney, that's essentially, it doesn't include because I remember what we did, we kind of earmarked expenses
It doesn't include that.
as if we don't get that aid, we're going to cut these. So technically, if we didn't get the aid, and we cut all those expenses, we'd still be negative 1.6 million.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
But you're saying we're at 6.6 unassigned, so we still would be over 3 million.
And basically what we're trying to do is, and we Mr. Stein and I kid around, is we have the money in this one hand right now from the surplus. We're really just going to move it over to the other pocket for the 2021 school year. And right now, it's not a wash, but it's pretty close to a wash. And that's assuming right now we don't know what's going to happen with the Federal CARES Act and those types of things with the reimbursement.
That is
Again, so
another.
and I'm going to be honest with you, we're probably not going to get any reimbursement if we are to get it, not in this year.
Right, in a timely manner, which is another factor that kind of, I think that was a little more recent, that even with all the talk of the feds now with a change in political parties perhaps helping us, the timing of that is highly suspect for 2021, if at all. I mean, I agree, I don't think we'll see it. So to go to your question, to have that extra 3, if you want to call it that, it's really illusory. It could disappear overnight.
I don't think, obviously, looking at this stuff, we really can't do much until we see how this plays out.
Correct.
We could get billions of dollars, $1 trillion CARE Act package that, bails out local government and school districts, and that could flow pretty fast if the state doesn't hold on to it. And that could reimburse us for most of this money for everything we spent on PPE.
And the
God
normal
willing,
things that could affect the budget, right? The number of students that need additional services or students that move in. These are all things that could have a positive or a negative impact on the overall budget, because obviously we're going to service our students to the fullest. So those are just the normal things that play in our normal budget cycle, that when we do these predictions, we always do it with an asterisk, because things change literally day by day.
So I looking at the numbers quick, and just because I was around during the development of all these budgets, and to see where they fall out. And I know that every one of those years we were looking at a tight budget, and luckily the wind blew in the right direction. But 16 to 17, we got $1 million surplus. 17 to 18, we had a $1.5 million surplus. 18, 19, 25,000. But what we're not seeing in there is that we had a mercury leak that we didn't put into the bond in order to get all the projects done, that we paid out of hide, and the elevator breakdown. I mean, we easily could have had nearly $1 million in surplus in that year, if not for those 2 unknowns. So we'll see how it plays out. Hopefully we do a good job with the expenses, and the $1.6 million isn't $1.6 million, it's much less.
And that's how we feel. And obviously, we've already tried to put a freeze on some things, and we've been talking about other freezes, just to kind of keep us in a good state. We've been moving in a positive direction. If you remember, for the 4 previous years, prior to these 4 years, we were in the red for 4 years. So you're also trying to build up our own, stability.
I think as the objective to get back over the 21, 22% funding level, getting through COVID and staying at the 16% that we landed at the end of 18, 19 would really be something I'd be pleased with.
And if you think about it too, one of the other things we've talked about is from a positive standpoint is, remember we had the extra, the fund balance or whatever, of 2.1 or whatever built into our budget. Now we've reduced that to about 1.6. So again, that is something that the comptroller wanted to see us do, so it's something we've been doing on a regular basis too. And we've been feeling comfortable about doing that because of some of these other things that have been taking place. So keep in mind though, remember, a lot of this from last year, a lot of it was what we call, I call it a one-hit wonder, right? The split dollar is not a revenue source that we will ever see again. It just happened to fall within last year, and it was, over $500,000. It came at the right time as we were coming into this year. That's really what it is.
But I'd also say, we also got to realize that we do have about $7 or $8 million that will start rolling above and beyond revenues because the energy performance plan that will, over the next 10 to 15 years, will be. Yeah, so that's also something that we can build our reserves into, and I think we've always said that would be strictly towards the reserves. The only thing I want to really bring up, and it might not sound like the best thing when we're talking about like 1.6 million and projected this, but it is early in the year. Anything could happen. I mean, if we continue, the cost could go up, the cost could shift in a whole different direction based on government aid, or just based on the fact that if we shut down and, we're not paying for buses and BOCES and all that different stuff, like last year, and the expenses can go down. There's a lot of unknowns. So I do know this. I do know as a board, we kind of came to some type of consensus and discussions when the summer started rolling up, reflecting upon the sacrifices that the students have made, missing out on the senior years, missing out on a lot of their educational, opportunities that they had by going full-time instruction this past spring, particularly the athletics. You're talking about a generation that has lost spring sports, now fall sports, and potentially winter, and who knows beyond that. We talked about as a board about we needed to, when we started discussing some of these surpluses, and we did kind of discuss like the give back, how do we make these kids whole? How can we make this community whole? And we talked about, what a lot of these student athletes want, and that's lights. And I know this sounds like the wrong time to bring it up, and I'm not saying that it's something that we have to slap down a checkbook for, but let's look at let's see how this year plays out. And I just ask that if those numbers don't work out the way they do, and if the red isn't red, that we have a plan to use some of that 2.6% over our 4%, to have a plan to make these students and these families whole. It's a good way to put this behind us by a year or two down the road having football, lacrosse, concerts, track meets under the lights. It's something that, no kidding, if you have $2 million above and beyond your 4% reserve, and that doesn't get eaten up by a surplus because things fall the right direction, I think we should have a plan at the end of the year, if things aren't this bad, if they're not nearly this bad, to be able to do that. That's all I asked. In light of this, because every year it sounds like the worst thing, and then we end up with 1.5 million in surplus, and it's like, wow, we could have done some nice things for a lot of people. I'm just asking to have a plan at the end of the year to assess this and say, wow, it looks like we're only going to be $100,000 in the red, and now what do we do with all this excess unassigned fund balance? And have a plan to execute a potential contract for it. If not, if there's no money available, we don't do it. But if we wait till the audit comes out in September of the next year, it's too late to use in the prior year's actions. That's all I ask for. I think we've had these discussions. I've been always on the, I thought this should have been in the bond. It was something that the community voted on it, thinking that it was being in the bond, and it wasn't. So I just think it's something that we got to take a look at for the cost compared to what it would give.
I'm fine with it. The piece that I am always, and you've always heard me speak about this, I'm obviously very cautious when it comes to our funds, especially as one of our goals, since I know I've been sitting in the seat, is to build our reserves. There's been no doubt about that. We've been trying to do that, trying to get us at least to where we thought we were around the average of everybody. That has been a goal of ours. And it's still a goal of mine, to put the district in a good fiscal position. I think the hardest part of it to answer, and I don't think this is probably the time for the discussion because there are so many unknowns, right? There are just way too many unknowns right now. But we will absolutely bring you information if that's what you'd like us to do. We can give you all of that as we're moving along. If you'd like something, every kind of 2 months where we are, we can kind of do that for you as well to kind of give you the information. As I said, I always am very cautious with it because I've been doing this a long time and you can see things change very, very quickly. with just things that happen within a district, whether it be all of a sudden we need a new roof, or whether it is we have an influx of students that move in. So there's just all those things that we'd have to take into consideration. And then also with when the lights, I think we'd have to really do, if we were ever to go that way, a real cost analysis, because that will be an additional expense to the district. Minus the one-time hit of the lights, you're talking about the electricity, you're talking about staffing, you're talking about supervision, you're talking about security. So all of that would have to be considered to look at the entire picture. So there's a lot to consider. Absolutely, we'll bring you guys information and we'll go from there.
Ms. Murray, why don't you go next, and I'll go.
Thank you. You made a lot of good points, Brian. When the bond originally evolved, the reason, in my mind, that we didn't do lights was because it's not what everyone in the community wants, and that's particularly the people that live around the field. I personally have I'm neutral on lights, but I think if it becomes the board's plan, I think those people need to be part of the conversation, at least to be aware that this is something that's we're thinking about seriously doing.
Thank you, Ms. Byrne. I would just say the board did vote on it for the bond. It was a 4-3 vote. Unfortunately, 4 people did not want it in the bond, so that's why it was not in the bond, as you remember. I would just say, Mr. Johnson, I think you obviously know where I am. I agree with that 100%. We do have the one hit from the split dollar. That could be the one-time revenue that pays for those lights. Obviously, we have the EPC going forward. That would be something that would help with the cost of the electricity with the lights. So I know it was one of our goals in the facilities this year, so if we could look into that, I think that's one of our goals, and I think if we can put something in place to provide the board some options to see if the board would want to consider lights next year. By the next time budget season comes around from January to May, I think we'll kind of know where we are at least with state aid. Ms. Broski?
I just want to go on record as voicing my objection to looking at it right now. After listening to Mr. Snyder's presentation, I don't know how we could actively pursue that and that be what we're talking about. I mean, we're talking about cutting programs and cutting services that exist already to try to live within potential aid being withheld from the state. And what we're concerned about is lights. To me, that is completely tone deaf to the taxpayer. And I understand that we've had years before where we've had surpluses. I can't imagine that this is going to be one of those years because we've never had a pandemic before. So that's just my opinion. I'm not against lights. I just want it to be done fiscally responsibly. That's where I stand with it.
I don't think anybody disagrees with fiscally responsible, but that presentation is 4.9 million unassigned fund balance. If we use the 1.6, it still keeps us over the 4%. I mean, I know we have a lot of unknowns. I think this is something we can definitely see differently or have different perspectives come January, February, March. But I think we hear you. We understand that, yes, it's not the top priority, but if we continue the trends we've been continuing over the years, then that money would obviously be there. But I definitely hear you.
Jason, that 1.8 million in the beginning of, I've done this budget every year, that 1.8 million was a negative $400,000 when we generated that budget, a potential negative. That's a $2.2 million swing.
I'm not saying that we're not going to see that. I'm just saying that based on Mr. Snyder's presentation tonight, I am very dubious that is going to be the case. And if we get to April or May or June, and we've shut down, so we've saved another $600,000 or something, I think that's a completely different conversation than us sitting here right where we are today.
The problem is every year we discuss this of if the money's available, and then we don't realize the money's available until it's too late to use it, because you need an invoice. You need that all in place before June 30th to at least execute it after the end of the year. And every year we come in and we figure out when everything kind of flies, oh, it's a much better year, but maybe next year. And this goes on every year. I'm not saying everybody has to vote for it. I'm saying let's just have a plan in place that if for some reason we get CARES Act money and everything falls in a different direction, that we have the ability to, it's nice, I'm going to say, I'm the biggest advocate of saving money and building. But at some point, there's only so much money you should save before you say, let's take the family on vacation.
Well, I don't disagree, but we haven't hit that 20% mark that we've been talking about.
A lot of unknowns.
Yeah.
We'll say it's unknowns.
I-
They will become to fruition as we get closer to spring.
I think just where we leave it is, if it's okay, is we'll just continue to bring you guys information, bring the board information as we do, and we'll kind of just update the predictions on a regular basis for you. This way you'll have the information ongoing, and we'll go from there.
I think it's fair, but I think it's also fair to say that was one of our goals to look into this year. So no one said we were doing it, absolutely, but it was one of our goals to look into for the following year. And you've heard me complain up here many times, if it doesn't go in the budget, a big ticket item does not go in the budget or it's not talked about in the prior year, it never happens, kind of what Mr. Johnson's saying the following year. So whenever we have surplus, we're already into the next budget cycle, and then people say we have to wait till the next year.
If this is such a community-driven need, why are we not looking at a potential bond for this?
Potential bond, because I think we're paying off, we're going to start paying off a bond right now for $30 million. I don't know if the community would want to put another bond on the table. I mean, obviously, if the board wants to pursue that, I mean, obviously, that's another conversation. Any other discussion on Mr. Snyder's presentation? Mr. Snyder, thank you so much, sir. We appreciate it. Dr. Harney, we'll turn it back to you for an academic status report with Dr. Ted Fulton.
Yep, so each year we are to provide you an academic type of presentation. This year's will be a little bit different, obviously, because we didn't have state testing and regents. But I believe Dr. Fulton is going to provide you with a presentation with, I believe, Mr. Haas and I think Mr. Andruskowitz, or is it just Mr. Haas? I'm not sure. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Fulton.
It'll be Mr. Haas, but Mr. Andruskowitz will be available to answer questions.
All right, Mr. Haas, it's all yours.
Well, I start actually, Dr. Harney.
All right, then off you go.
Thank you, sir. All right, so our purpose of our presentation is to review our district goals as it relates to our indicators of student performance. ESSA, which is the law of the land, which had replaced No Child Left Behind 2 years ago, college and career readiness indicators, and student achievement. So we do face a number of destination and challenges, specifically as it related to COVID and assessments, which we will go into, but we still do have some measures to be able to kind of to gauge our progress. Just to remember, for our district goals, we do focus on learning, connections, pathways, environment, resources, professional growth. Really, and especially during the time of COVID, that we really have tried to stay focused on the learning while maintaining our connections and also our environment. So, these work hand in hand and shape and guide what we do. Now, ESSA and the impact of COVID. I presented last year, and it's time for a review, is that these are the new factors that ESSA would measure. Student academic achievement, which is based off of the 3 through 8 testing program and the Regents program. Student growth, academic progress, specifically in ELA and math. Graduation rates, English language proficiency for our English language learners. Chronic absenteeism, and college, career, and civic readiness. Now, obviously, because of COVID and for attendance, especially regarded since March 13th is when we began to close and move out, is we're not sure what that's going to look like moving forward. College and career civic readiness, this is something that is measured with regards to advanced placement courses, with regards to training, with regards to how courses are weighted, and student plans. So again, these are things that have not actually been enacted yet because we did not have the testing program last spring. But ESSA is still the law of the land. The ESSA requirements were waived for the 1920 school year, but they have not been waived for the 2021 school year. And we'll go into that a little bit when we talk about the elementary assessments. Sorry. So our traditional assessments pre-COVID is the state assessment program, again, a use of our iReady diagnostic, Fontenson Pinnell, and some miscellaneous diagnostic assessments, and our locally developed common assessments. These, again, we do not have as a measure for this year because they did not occur last year, but we still do have some measures. So some points, again, to consider pre-COVID is that with the expansion of the accountability measures, we still have not gone through that. Prior to COVID, the state had made adjustments for length and design of the exams to encourage more students to participate in the 3 through 8 assessment program. The public release of test questions. We had expanded our use of computer-based testing, and that the state does change cut points for the exams and how they're rated after the kids take it. And we at BBP have a high number of refusals to participate in the state-mandated testing program, which is approximately 74%. So I did keep that. Again, we do not have it from last year, but we are at 74%, which is one of the higher rates within the district. And with this came some requirements that came down from the state because of our opt-out rate. So we are required to do a participation rate improvement plan. So even though we didn't have testing last year, we still fall under these auspices. And part of the plan is that we will need to administer a survey for parents and staff to identify and quantify reasons for test refusal. I would present that information to the board. Via our instructional council, we will then take the use of that data to promote assessment awareness, identify interventions, and promote parent-student participation in decision-making. Notice the language with regards to decision-making is we share the information to allow parents the decision to whether or not they want to participate in the testing program. And then, which I did do prior to the shutdown, is I would conduct parent assessment information nights for the purpose of informing parents about the impact of opting in or out, disseminate information, ask parent questions, and to disseminate the information from the state so that parents could make the appropriate decision. So again, these are required under our participation rate improvement plan. This will be again in question with regards to, as of right now, the state has says that they still plan on utilizing the 3 through 8 testing program. The state did cancel the January Regents exams. Now, so what does that mean? Well, ESSA is a federal funded program. So in order for New York State to cancel or waive the 3 through 8 testing program, the federal government would need to allow states to apply for a waiver with regards to the ESSA requirements. Under the current administration, the Federal Education Department has said they still plan on implementing the ESSA requirements, which will then require New York State to implement through its 3 through 8 testing. If the federal government changes its stance with regards to the change in administration, then New York State would have more flexibility with regards to whether or not have the 3 through 8 testing program. But the one thing that the state could control was the January Regents exams, and the January Regents exams are canceled. Right now the plan is in June. Technically we're still planning for those exams, but whether or not they are going to be administered is still something that needs to be determined. So for just some of the things that we can do is enrollment for us in math and science is important, especially starting in the middle school. And we have an increase this year for 49% for our students that are enrolled in Earth Science, which is 8th grade students taking a Regents exam at the middle school. And we've continued to see a positive increase in trend. And our pre-algebra and algebra enrollment is that you'll notice that, again, roughly a change of a percent is like 2 students with the changes in the cohort. But we're really happy for 2021 is we were able to maintain the enrollment. What happens is sometimes in the past, students would take pre-algebra but then not tackle algebra. But from last year, when you take a look, we were able to hold on to a higher number of students. 45% of the students took pre-algebra in 1920, and in 2021, 43% then moved on to algebra. So the goal is that when a student takes pre-algebra, you want to provide them the support to be able to continue and to take the algebra course. And again, we are increasing our numbers of students that are taking algebra in 8th grade. And with that, I'll turn it now over to Mr. Haas.
Thank you, Dr. Fulton. So now what I'll take you through is just some post-secondary success. As we've talked about in the past, one of the things that we look at is the strength of a high school schedule. So it is one of the leading factors right now with college admissions, and also leading factors with college success. So we're going to take you through some slides that just show some of the statistics that are contribute to those factors. So percent of students taking Algebra 2 at the high school level has remained steady at 82%. So that means out of our graduating class this year, 82% of them have been enrolled either last year in 10th grade or this year in Algebra 2. If you move on to the next slide. Okay, this is one where, when you first look at it, it kind of stands out. And that's where we look at the 4 years of math and science for our graduating class of 2021. And we do see a drop, a slight drop of 4% with math, and a 12% drop when it comes to science. Now, in doing a deeper dive to see what contributed to this, you really go on to the next slide, which we'll show in a second, which has to do with our students attending BOCES Career and Technical Education. Right now we have 27 students that are in Career and Tech Ed, and what happens with that is a student enrolled in that does not have the ability to take 4 years of math or science because of BOCES taking up 4 periods out of the day. So traditionally what happens within a student's schedule is they take 1 year of math, their junior year, say, they take the science their senior year. So when you look at this number, the 19% of students that did not take 4 years of science, that equates to 36 students. Out of those 36 students, 23 of them are BOCES. Okay, so you start to see where this number comes from. We also have 3 students who are taking different pathways going into some of the new technology course offerings that we have rather than science. When you look at math, the 13% equates to 25 students, and out of those 25 students, 19 of them are BOCES enrolled. So you start to see where that number comes from as we've put a little bit more of an emphasis on the career side for some of our students. So moving on to the next slide, you see our BOCES enrollment over the years has increased. This year we do have 27 students who are at the BOCES technical centers. So now moving on, what you do, when we look at this, it does lead us into our advanced Regents diploma rate. Okay, the students obviously with their math, the Algebra 2, science exam, and foreign language. What you'll see with our advanced Regents diploma rate is it's from last year was at 78%. So relatively steady over the past few years, fluctuating between the 79 to 78%, fluctuating. When you look at a 1%, that's about 2 students when you look at a cohort of students from year to year. So the other area that we start to focus on is some of the college courses that students can participate in. And these are our AP numbers from last year. So the numbers continue to increase in the amount of students that are participating in the AP program. 263 students last year took tests, and that equated to 581 students. Now, one of the interesting things that you always think about is with the increase in students that are enrolled and taking tests, what's the impact going to be on the performance of those students? And if you see on the next slide, okay, our AP scores went up. So it went up on average from in the 3 range, the 4 range, and the 5s. It went up about 6 to 8%. So if you look, we had 452 students that were a 3 or better and 270 that were a 4 or better. So our students last year did extremely well on the AP exams. And even with the modified format where they were taking it home online. These are our AP Scholars. So you have the AP Scholar with distinction, which is really the highest honor. It's students who have scored average score of 3.5 or better on their exam. So you see those numbers have increased as well. Another area that we have focused on at the high school over the years is our partnership with Suffolk Community College and the Beacon program. And what this is a dual enrollment program where our art staff has gotten certified by Suffolk Community College through their own education and the courses that we put forward. So a student can not only take the class, say pre-calculus, enriched, they take that here at the high school, they walk away at the end of the year, if they enroll through Suffolk Community College as well, they walk away with the credit. So last year we increased our offerings to 13 courses. You had 186 students participate, which was 296 enrollments. Obviously, some kids took more than one course. Really, the part that stands out to me is the amount of credits. The average credit that a student walked away with was 6.4. So that's credits that they're able to, how it works is at the end of the year, they request the transcript from Suffolk Community College and have that sent directly to their school. So it is transferring credits from one college to another. Another thing that we obviously look at is the students that are pursuing college. So there's another area where you do see a slight drop from one year to the next. And looking at that, the 8% of students that did not pursue, that weren't attending college. And now, one thing to note, this is a self-reported number that comes in at the end of the year when you're asking your students as to what their plans are. So out of that 8%, that equates to 15 students. So we started to look at, okay, what were they doing? Well, 6 of them did go on to another type of institution. It wasn't college, so it would be vocational training. 2 of the students were special education, so they have continued their education beyond Bayport Blue Point. 3 of them, I'm trying to find my page here so I remember my numbers. 3 of them did indicate they were seeking employment, and there were 4 students that at the time did not know what their plans were. So it does, you start to see that we do still have the students are going on within education, and they are seeking employment based on their experiences.
Thank you, Mr. Haas. So our steps moving forward, and really we'll be learning this together, is what does assessment look like in the era of COVID? What will be the determination regarding the 3 through 8 testing program? What will be the determination as it relates to the high school regents? Will we be able to stay open so we can continue with some of our diagnostics with regards to iReady, Fountains and Pinnell, et cetera? The big thing is that we're doing right now, and departmentally that the chair people have been working with the staff, and our elementary teachers have been working on grade level, is kind of identifying the benchmark standards and indicators to be able to assess for the students to try to determine if gaps have then indeed began to be identified since we've been dealing with the pandemic. Student interventions, I have mentioned here, Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. This is types of your AIS kind of services and services that could result in staffing into Tier 2, Tier 3. So one of the things we're going to begin to look at is to see how we are implementing our Tier 1. These are kind of your interventions, academic interventions that occur in a classroom, and to be able to update and provide training for our teachers and staff. So the theory is, if you're able to successfully provide a Tier 1 intervention, you might be able to mitigate the need for additional AIS teachers and additional support that might equal staffing. So we're going to look at that. Obviously, everything we do here at BBP are student social emotional needs, engagement, and the conditions for learning. Are we able to put the students and the staff in the best positions for learning? And if we are in a remote learning situation, how we continue to support our students and staff during that journey. And then working with the high school with regards to CTE opportunities, dual credit opportunities for college, BOCES, and STEAM exploration to maximize our use with regards to our STEAM lab. So our next steps for us is really, again, kind of reimagining student assessment during COVID, what it looks like. We're still updating our curriculum writing and the revision process as it relates to the next generation standard. Continue the evaluation of assessment data and benchmarking as it relates to our curriculum. Is our curriculum meeting the students' needs, and what changes can we make? And then because of COVID and whether or not with what happens to the standardized tested program, is this a window of opportunity for us to explore and research some performance-based or project-based learning? And that's something that we're going to begin to dip our toes into the water and begin to explore. We have our initiatives, our Seal of Biliteracy. Last year, we actually did have 2 students successfully complete the Seal of Biliteracy. Unfortunately, a couple weren't able to finish due to COVID and the decision not to participate. But this year, we're on track for 4 students to potentially get the Seal of Biliteracy. So we're going to look to continue to expand. Google Classroom integration with regards to really in our classroom to maximize the use of our instructional software and our instructional technology. Teachers College implementation during COVID in a remote learning environment as compared to in classroom, providing training for our staff. The finalization of our next generation standards report card. Presently, we have a 5th grade Pearson Science implementation program moving on, and our middle school is also investigating and exploring that science program. Our SAVAS math implementation and our RTI intervention training support to look at with Tier 1 interventions. So thank you very much to Mr. Andreskowitz and Mr. Haas for the assistance collecting the data, and if anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Fulton, Mr. Haas, and Mr. Andreskowitz. At this time, we'll open up to the board for any questions. Mr. Brodsky?
I'm not sure if this is best directed towards Mr. Haas or Dr. Fulton, but in terms of the BOCES program, is there the potential to have a self-reporting survey similar to what's done with the students that are pursuing college, where they could indicate whether, they have job placement after the program, or if they're pursuing further, join a union or something like that. Because I think that would be a pretty key way to evaluate the effectiveness of that program, similar to the way that we do with the kids that are reporting whether they're going to college or not.
So you have, when you do the self-reporting at the end of the year, it's the postgraduate plans for the students. So that is one of their options that they would write down that they're seeking. So that's what we did have, where we were at 92% this year. When we did break down the numbers, we had several students who had indicated that they were seeking employment. We had 6 students that were indicating that they were going on to some other type of vocational school. Many of those students attended a BOCES program, so it is continuing that education as they go forward.
Perfect. Thank you.
And Jason, we could also update how we report the data on that slide. I know that's the template of that slide is 4-year, 2-year, but as, again, we've emphasized vocational training and vocational employment, that we can update that slide on how we report that, so maybe more accurately reflect the paths that our students are choosing. So we can most certainly do that for next year's presentation.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'm just curious about the numbers for BOCES for next year, and if COVID has had any impact on that, if we expect around 27 again, or if that number will change.
I would anticipate, when you look at a district in a high school our size, that seems to be a number that would be relatively stable at this point. That I don't anticipate it growing from there.
Yep. And really what it takes a look too is, even with our not only BOCES enrollment, but even our college course offerings and advanced placement, you're reaching what is potentially a saturation point. We only have a finite number of kids, and we already have a wide variety of choices. So to kind of take a look with regards to percentage, it'll be interesting to see. But like I said, we anticipate similar type numbers for the upcoming school year.
Any other trustee questions? Once again, Dr. Folden, Mr. Haas, Mr. Andreskowitz, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Moving on to the consent agenda. Are there any items the board would like removed from the consent agenda and placed on the regular agenda? Not hearing any, can I have a motion to approve consent agenda items H, I, J, K, L, and M? Mr. Hall, second. I think that was Mr. Siri. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 7-0. Moving on to the regular agenda. Can I have a motion to approve budget transfer in the amount of $384,000 for the 2019-20 school year? Mr. Siri, second. Mr. Krug, discussion. I would just ask Dr. Horney or Mr. Snyder if we could just get some background about the transfer for this from the 2019 to 20 budget.
The transfers for 2019 are the final round of transfers to close out the budget. They are in total $396,000, with 325 of them being simple transfers between codes to cover predominantly health insurance opt-outs, which was a little bit more of an added savings in that area. The unplanned expenditures, which total $71,000, were to cover increase in substitutes and some special education placements, aides and assistants.
Was there any place that this money was transferred to that was already pre-budgeted for?
Well, again, for the top group of transfers, 1 through 6 that you look at, they were budgeted for, but just wound up being expensed in different codes. For instance, the top line there, I'm saying that's related to negotiations, so we typically, as a budgeting technique, wouldn't do that. The health benefit opt-outs that you see, which is transfer 6, they were unknown, but the funding for it really came out of savings from the health insurance, right? By nature, that's what happens there. So we called them budgeted expenditures because we had the money to pay for it.
I'm saying we're moving out of, you're talking about number 6, we're moving money from those codes because we did not need that money into the codes on the right-hand side, meaning we don't need to expense that out of the 2021 budget.
Right, meaning that on the left side, the money was not needed in those codes for the reasons I'm giving you off to the right.
Right, but I'm saying, was that money in the 2021 budget now, that money is going to be additional monies in this budget.
Well, again, it's early to say, but we budgeted the health opt-outs based on information we knew really when we adopted in April. So could it be, there could be a small variance there if we wind up getting additional opt-outs. We typically have a deadline for them in November with the open enrollment, but we wouldn't stop additional ones from happening because it saves us money in this particular example. Does that answer your question?
No, it does. I mean, I just wanted to make it clear that 384,000, basically on the left-hand column right there, those were additional monies, unanticipated. And we're moving them to the right-hand column, meaning it would open up additional money in the 2021 budget.
It means for the $71,000 transfers below it, we did not have money for those items planned for in the budget. They were new things to me and to the administration. We just simply didn't anticipate those specific expenditures, and we had to find money in other codes. And what I'm saying there for the first one, specifically number 7, for example, is those salaries that we're transferring out of, there were surplus funds in there related to staffing moves in the administrative ranks that led to us just having surplus funds there. So just for, expediency, and the money was there, and I knew it was a reliable source, we moved the money out of that code to pay for overages related to, leave of absence costs, for overruns and substitutes, and for additional leave of absence that were paid that we just didn't experience in the years before, so they weren't budgeted for.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Any other questions from trustees? All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 7-0. Can I have a motion to approve the budget transfer in the amount of $135,000 for the 2021 school year? Motion. Mr. Hall, second. Mrs. Byrne. Mr. Snyder, back to you, maybe for the next couple. Can we just talk about this transfer, please? COVID expenses?
This is $135,000 for COVID, which was inclusive. It was included in the presentation I gave you. Just using a rounded number here for the transfer itself, but there were very specific COVID-related expenditures related to HVAC and disinfecting that were required in the Buildings and Grounds Code. And we took the money out of transportation because I know that there is surplus funds there and designated fund balance sitting in that code, and we have to come up with the money. So really, the codes we draw from first would be those codes that have that designated fund balance there, because that's where the surplus is. Again, it's early, and additional surplus could materialize in other codes. It doesn't look that way with all the COVID expenditures that we're facing. So right now, because I see the budget as very tight and in the red, we're now immediately looking at, those codes to at least fund the transfers. At the end, if we're going to use the fund balance to do so, which is the plan, but for right now, we need POs cut. So to cut a PO to pay for this, we need to move budget money into the code.
So this 135 wouldn't come out of the 4.9 we were talking about earlier?
For now, but ultimately, when we close the books, we'll use the fund balance to pay for that. But to get the PO on, I take the money out of transportation at this point just to get the PO cut and to get the expenses paid for.
But we could save potentially money in transportation because of no athletics right now.
Again, sir?
Potentially, we could save money in transportation, so you might not have to do that.
Yes.
Any other questions for Mr. Snyder? All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 7-0. Just the last one, Mr. Snyder, can I have a motion to approve the budget transfer in the amount of $368,000 for the 2021 school year? Ms. Byrne, second. Mr. Siri, Mr. Snyder?
Yeah, this transfer is actually related to the public library. There's no real fiscal impact to the district, but because of the timing of when they borrowed their money and when we adopted our budget, we didn't have this information. So we had to basically take money out of codes that we knew there would be surplus. And again, that's the health insurance code, because for the same reason, there's a little bit of fund balance in that code, that designated number again. I had originally anticipated it coming from that band principal code of 227. So on the revenue side, we get the money back from the library from their levy, so it really is a net zero. But again, the concept is we have to cut a PO to make the payment for them, and then we get reimbursed in January when the first round of tax payments come in from the taxpayers.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Any other trustee questions? All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 7-0. Open it up to the community for any new business. And Ms. Dungate? We have,
We wouldn't talk about what we talked about in exec session in public session. Just
so I will definitely get your answer in writing for the recess breaks. Thank you, Ms. Dungate. Any trustee new business? Not hearing any, can I have a motion to adjourn? Mr. Siri, second. Mr. Krug, all in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you guys so much for coming. We will see you on December 1st.